Bible reading, quite a serious Bible reading, but thank you very much. That'll be wonderful, and Neil is going to read to us now.
Today's reading is from the book of Micah, chapter 3, verses 1 to 8. Sorry, chapter 6. The Lord's case against Israel. Listen to what the Lord says. Stand up. Plead my case before the mountains. Let the hills hear what you have to say. Hear, ye mountains, the Lord's accusation. Listen, you everlasting foundations of the earth. For the Lord has a case against his people. He is lodging a charge against Israel. My people, what have I done to you? How have I burdened you? Answer me. I brought you up out of Egypt and redeemed you from the land of slavery. I sent Moses to lead you, also Aaron and Miriam. My people, remember what Balak, king of Moab, plotted, and what Balaam, son of Beor, answered. Remember your journey from Shittim to Gilgal, that you may know the righteous acts of the Lord. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with the calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of olive oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
Does anybody like a courtroom drama? Yeah, oh, a few nods there. Or a great courtroom kind of film or movie. Can you name some of those great, iconic kind of courtroom scenes in films? What are there? Oh, A Few Good Men, I heard. Yeah, A Few Good Men with Tom Cruise. Was there one back there? Runaway Jury. Oh, I don't know that one. Oh, John Grisham. All right, okay, yeah.
Perry Mason on television when I was a boy.
Perry Mason, yeah. Judge Judy. To Kill a Mockingbird, slightly different there. Or my personal favourite, Miracle on 34th Street. You can't beat it. The courtroom we're in a courtroom drama today in our passage. We're in a courtroom drama. And last week, the court was mentioned as well. Well, there was the interview with the lawyer who had that. And then Catherine put on a lovely judge's wig, didn't she? People who were here saw that when we were thinking about Amos. And today, the passage again revolves around a charge that God brings against his people. But to begin with, just a little bit of context. Micah is quite a short book, which we find towards the end of the Old Testament. It's only 7 chapters long, so you could probably read it in about, half an hour, 25 minutes, half an hour, if you wanted to go away and read the whole account. It is written somewhere between 740 and 700 BC. I tried to find a really simple diagram, but there's nothing really simple. But yeah, so that's about the time it was written. Micah is one of 4 prophets who are writing at the same time. So Micah is a contemporary of Isaiah, of Hosea, and of Amos, who we were thinking about last week. And by this point, Israel is a divided kingdom. So they began as one kingdom, but then in the 10th century BC, they were divided into two, the kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judah in the south. And Micah is one of the prophets who spoke to the southern kingdom. And just a little bit of geography. Again, I don't know how well you can see that. The nations of Israel and Judah were surrounded by two great empires. There was the superpower of Assyria on the one side and the superpower of Egypt on the other. And this was actually a time of real prosperity for Israel and Judah, because sort of sandwiched in the middle there became a bit of a trading route between the two empires. There was lots of people moving throughout the regions, and this became this was very prosperous for them. But, of course, the prosperity wasn't enjoyed by all of the people. And there's concerns in the writings of all of the 8th century prophets, including Micah, about this. And Micah highlights two major concerns with God's people. The first is idolatry. So worshipping other things and placing other things above God. And as we know, this has continually been a problem for God's people in the Old Testament. And the second thing is economics. So during this period of prosperity, an elite group of people emerged with social, political, religious power. And they used their position of power to oppress marginalized people and to take advantage of the poor. So one thing that in particular was happening in the time of Micah was that these wealthy people were taking advantage of poor people in times of their financial struggle and difficulty. So when people perhaps had experienced a famine or family members had died, they had to take out loans on their ancestral land, the land that belonged to them. But the wealthy lenders didn't just mortgage their land, they took it for themselves, they took it off them. They allowed them to stay on the land and to manage the land, but they didn't pay them a living wage. And so, as you can imagine, this kept them in a state of perpetual poverty and debt. So this was the economic reality of what was going on when Micah was writing. So just to look at a passage in Micah 2, this is what he says: "Woe to those who plan iniquity, to those who plot evil on their beds. At morning's light they carry it out because it is in their power to do it. They covet fields and seize them, and houses and take them. They defraud a man of his home, a fellow man of his inheritance." And then just after the passage that Neil read to us, this is from the Message version of the Bible. This is God speaking. "Do you expect me to overlook obscene wealth you've piled up by cheating and fraud? Do you think I'll tolerate shady deals and shifty scheming? I'm tired of the violent rich bullying their way with bluffs and lies." So that's the background of what is happening in Micah chapter 6 that Neil just read to us. And we find ourselves in that courtroom. God, the prosecutor. And he is bringing a case against Israel. And in verse 1 and 2, God speaks through Micah. And he appeals to the mountains, the trees, and the foundations of the earth to be his witnesses. He is saying the whole earth has seen what he has done. In verses 3 to 5, we hear God's argument. God has kept his part of the covenant relationship with the Israelite people. He has been generously faithful. He brought them out of Egypt. He ransomed them from slavery. He provided leadership for them. He helped them overcome their enemies and he led them to the promised land. God has done no wrong. The Israelite people have got no case against him. So then in verses 6 to 7, we get to hear Israel's response. And they ask this question of what the appropriate response of Israel to the case against them is. And the response presumes that God wants something. And the assumption is that a sacrifice of some description is what he will want. What do you want? Israel asks. And we see this ascending intensity as they make their suggestions. Shall I approach you with burnt offerings? That's what we've always done in the past. How about a calf? A 1-year-old calf? Will that do? Will you be pleased with thousands of rams? Surely that must be enough. No? How about 10,000 rivers of olive oil? It's getting a bit ridiculous now. And then he takes this huge leap from the offering of animal sacrifices to the offering of a human life. My firstborn, the fruit of my body. Is that what you want from us? It appears to be a desperate attempt to find the thing that will work. And it's presumed that what is required is a commodity, it's a product. And if we just pause for a second, I wonder if we ever do this with God, if we ever try to appease God, if we ever try to use external acts, outward religious acts, to make amends with God, or perhaps to persuade him to our ways. The anxious uncertainty about what sacrifice is needed is replaced by a calm certainty about what God requires. What does God require from his people? To act justly, to love mercy or kindness, and to walk humbly with God. God makes it clear that he is not after any material thing, but a life that is fully surrendered to him. Doing justice, loving mercy, and walking humbly. What does it mean to live this kind of life? Well, let's just take a look at each one in turn. To act justly. Here we see again that word justice, mishpat, in the Hebrew. And that's the word that appears over 400 times in the Old Testament scripture, as we learned a couple of weeks ago. And more times than not, it is referring to this restorative justice and speaks about lifting up the oppressed and the downtrodden. It is about treating people fairly. Mishpat is about making people whole again and restoring them. 2 weeks ago, we thought about who those people were at the time of the minor prophets. They were the orphans, the widows, the immigrants, and the economically poor. And I don't know if you remember, but I challenged you to go away and think about who those people are in our society today. I don't know if any of you had the chance to do that. You would have if you came to our church prayer meeting that following week, because we actually looked at this issue and we filled a flip chart paper with all the people that fitted into those categories now in our society. People working for less than minimum wage, people using food banks, the elderly living alone with no family, single parents, asylum seekers, any minority group, people living with special needs. The list went on and on and on. I'm sure you can think of lots of people to fill those categories. What does it look like for us as individuals and us as a church to make sure those people are treated fairly? I was thinking that to act justly or to do justice is a doing word. So we're not just required to think justly, to contemplate it or meditate upon it, or to merely talk about it. We are called to do it. When I go to a shop to buy a chocolate bar, which happens way more often than it should, I have a choice. I can buy the bar that I've been really craving and the one that's probably quite a bit cheaper, or I can buy the fair trade chocolate bar, the one that people have been paid fairly for. I can do justice when I buy a bar of chocolate. It's not enough just for me to go into the shop and to think about the people who are being exploited, but then continue to shop as I want. I have to act. And it is to my shame that I don't always make the right choice. When I'm sorting out my life admin, which I don't do half as enough when I buy chocolate, when I'm paying bills, when I'm choosing my energy supplier or my bank, I can do justice. I can look into which ones are the most ethical ones to choose. It might be a bit of hassle. It might cost a little bit more, but I can act justly. A few years ago, when we were at Heaton, someone from Tier Fund came to lead our harvest service. And he talked about how sorting out our energy supplier can be an act of worship to God. Have you ever considered that? It's not just the songs that we sing that are worship to God, but how we bank, how we get energy, how we spend our money. We have a choice when we hear about a policy that is going to affect the poorest people in society. We can sit back and think, well, it doesn't actually affect me, or we can act. We can write to MPs, we can sign petitions, we can rally support, we can do justice. Now, of course, we cannot do everything. There is so much injustice, it is all around us. And, we would just be exhausted and overwhelmed if we tried to fight every injustice ourselves. But we can do something. We can all start somewhere. And as a church, I really want to say this morning, Stocksfield Baptist Church, we have choices to make about how we spend our money as a church, about how we use our time and our resources as a church, about our focus as a church. Are we putting acting justly at the core of who we are? Is it central to us? Is it what we are known for in this community? Do we have a reputation for acting justly? Or is it a periphery issue for us? What can you and I do? What can we do as a church? We are required to act justly. And we are required to love mercy, or in other translations, to love kindness. The word in Hebrew is hesed. Hesed is used 247 times in the Old Testament. I just sit around counting the words in the Bible. 247 times, or so Google tells me. It is another strong theme in the biblical story. Hesed is a covenant obligation of love. It is the love that God shows to us in his covenant to us. It is a love that is marked by grace. Grace is not earned, it is a free gift. It is what we experience. We know that the loving kindness of God cannot be earned and is not deserved. And we thank God for his love towards us, his hesed. And we, in turn, are to respond to that by showing loving kindness to other people. God expects us to operate out of that covenantal relationship with others. And whilst we're not expected to have those kind of warm, like fuzzy, loving, romantic feelings for everybody, we are asked to look out for others, to care for them, and to share the undeserved grace and mercy we have received with them. 3 weeks ago in our Connect service, we met Big Phil. Big Phil. Can you remember? He was locked here in chains. Why was he in chains? It was the unforgiving servant, the story that Jesus told. Because Big Phil had received forgiveness and mercy, the loving kindness of God, but he had not offered it to others. Jesus taught us that showing God's love is one of the 2 greatest commandments. Do you know that in the whole of the Torah, the Israelites were given 613 commandments to keep? Just say 613 to the person next to you. Can you imagine trying to keep all of those commandments? How many commandments? 248 of them were positive commandments. 365 were negative, the kind of thou shalt nots. People say that's one for every day of the year. On top of the how many? There were 1,500 more commands in the Mishnah, a collection of teachings on the Torah for the Jewish people to keep, that sort of added on to the commandments given in the Torah. Micah reduced it down to 3. Jesus took it down to 2. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your strength, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, and love your neighbour as yourself. It appears that love is the measure. Love for God and love for others. We are to show mercy and kindness to other people as a response to the mercy and kindness God has shown us. To act justly, to love mercy. And finally, we are to walk humbly. And the Hebrew word here is tsana. It's a lot harder to pronounce. Tsana, T-S-A-N-A, which means modestly or lowly. We are to have a humble posture as we live our lives, acknowledging that God is God and we are not. To understand our place. Now that, of course, doesn't mean believing that we're kind of worms and we're worthless and we deserve nothing. That's not a godly identity at all. But it does mean that there is a higher power that we are called to live under. And we are called to live in humility, not lording it over other people. The Bible talks often about pride. Pride speaks of arrogance, of self-sufficiency, and the need to occupy center stage. Whereas humility speaks of considering others, of having a gentle spirit and not competing for top position. Jesus said, the one who must be great amongst you must be your servant. So I wonder how our walk with God is. Are we walking humbly? I wonder what that might look like for you. In the great courtroom of Micah chapter 6, the Israelites were found wanting. They didn't change their ways. They didn't do the thing that God required of them. And because of that, God allowed them to be taken over by us. And we'll celebrate that in just a moment in communion. And Jesus sent his Spirit to empower his followers to live in the way that God requires. So we turn to Jesus for forgiveness when we don't live according to his standards and we don't get this right. And we look to the Spirit to fill us, to empower us, to cause us to do. And we remember that Micah tells us who we are walking with. We are walking with God. And he will be our helper. So just to sum up, we must not fall into the trap of thinking that loving God, that following Jesus is about observing certain practices or about doing certain things in a certain way. Of course, there are some practices that God tells us are very helpful for us. They will help us walk with him, but they are not what it is all about. It is not about religious duties or observances. Micah tells us here, he spells it out as plain as it can be, what God requires of us, what he is looking for. God is not looking for a specific type of person. No, God is not looking for a specific type of offering. Rather, he is looking for a specific type of person. Someone who does justice, who loves kindness and walks humbly. A church who does justice, who loves kindness and walks humbly with God. How will we respond? I'm going to invite the band to come and sing a song that we may or may not know. I invite you to use it as a prayer to God and to reflect on the words that we've heard this morning.